Trying to force or trying to fit an entity from the prism of the West or the East or what have you, yes, it is a problem. One thing, another big problem in line with this, with Africa, is that the legacy of colonialism. I mean, look at all the maps. It's arbitrary also. Arbitrary in that, what was the state formation in Somalia, the political entity itself, How about Ethiopia? How about Eritrea? How about all the other African countries? It's very, very arbitrary. That also is the legacy of colonialism. The same people speaking the same, belonging to the same ethnic group being divided, living in 3, 4, 5 countries, That also is an issue. And also the issue of Somalia. Look at the flag. I mean, it's a 5-pointed flag. I mean, and it's also enshrined in the Somali constitution. I mean, to the disappointment or to the not acceptance of neighboring countries. The 5-pointed star stands for 5 territories. The Italian Somaliland, the British Somaliland, Djibouti, Ogaden, and the north, that frontier province of Kenya. I mean, for Ethiopians is unacceptable. Also for the Kenyans. I mean, so the conflict had started since the independence period in the 1960s. The 3 wars between Somalia and Ethiopia. I mean, the 64 war. It was bloody, and then we have the mid-70s war that was also more bloody, and still there is an unresolved agenda. Now, of course, the Somalis are absorbed internally, but we wish them a good solution, a stable Somalia. But with this stable Somalia, if the same old agenda is also forwarded, then another deja vu again, another nightmare, another war. That also is an issue. So. Indigenous, yes. Let the grassroots level, let the indigenous people talk among themselves. You can't build peace from the bottom up. That's why I insist that let the South Somalis, the southern central part, let them deal with their own problems, and let the Hawiyas and the north, the Daraoud, take a back seat. Let them find the solutions to that. If that could be followed, I think we'll make some progress.
Yeah. I'd agree with a lot of what's said. I'd dispute the terms in which you set it up. I don't see it as an either or, that we have a thing called a Western version of organising political communities, or we have an African version of organising political communities. I basically think the starting point is one of really messy hybridity. The colonial period came in, it changed certain things in African politics and society, it left certain things the same. So within the West we have a debate what a political community is supposed to look like. Not all states look the same. Same in the African continent. So I see the starting point is the issue of hybridity, and to what extent you saw local indigenous political communities basically fractured, changed, or reshaped because of the colonial period. And given that, I would then make the point, all political borders are arbitrary, not just the ones in Africa. Where the Scots, the Welsh and the English are supposed to live on different sides of the line on my island. Political borders are there because powerful people can make political borders stick. Now, in the African case, that's been particularly stark because a group of people got together at Berlin in the end of the 19th century and drew some of them with rulers, on places they'd never been to. And in that sense, it's very explicit in Africa, what is often left implicit elsewhere. But we've got to remember as well, African state leaders in 1964 in the Cairo Declaration decided to keep those political borders because they thought keeping them was going to be basically in the long run lead to more political stability than less. Now, we can debate, I think quite rightly, as you say, that there's been some big problems with that decision. But I think the question we need to ask with those 2 footnotes is really what type of political communities work, and then apply that in whatever local context we're talking about. And that's where I'd go back to the point about Somaliland and things earlier. If we're trying to see and rub against the grain of what local practices and what local communities do seem to work for themselves, then I think, yes, you wouldn't want to get into a situation where some foreign outsiders, Western or otherwise, come in and say, this is the way we think our political communities work, this is the way you should do it. But to set it up as just there's a Western model of the state and there's some different African indigenous one, I don't think is necessarily gets to the nub of the issue. I think it's more, how do we make really hybrid political communities work now? And that's what gives us a headache, because I think as a species and a planet, we haven't necessarily got our head around how to answer that question particularly well. Where you're absolutely right is in the workings of the United Nations, because this is an organization of states, for states, where to be a member of the club, You have to have certain credentials of statehood, and that's why the Somalilands, the Western Saharas, the Palestines of this world don't get membership to the club and don't be a part of the conversation. What I think the UN needs to do, and where I do agree with the premise of your conversation, is to think more carefully about how can we let non-state entities that actually act and behave like states in many respects, how do they become part of the conversation about what we do going forward?